It is a rare moment when we have the entire delegation of the United States Senate from the state of California in one spot, but here they are. That is the senior senator from California, the Honorable Alex Padilla, and the junior senator, Senator Adam Schiff, Democrats, both from the great state. Thank you very much for joining us. Senator, we'll start with you. We know from the governor and from the mayor that there was tremendous cooperation from the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers after the fire quickly to remove the debris in both the Pacific Palisades as well as in Altadena. But there are questions as to the cooperation going forward. What is your issue now?
Well, I have a few concerns. First, I want to make sure that we bring back the federal resources that California needs and deserves. It has been a year since the fires, and we still haven't gotten the financial support from the federal government that we should. Alex and I have been fighting for that, but the president has yet to make a request of Congress, and Republicans in Congress are unwilling to go forward with that funding unless they get a request from the president. So that is priority number one. But there are other issues too. One of the challenges that I think a lot of people are facing is they're still concerned about lead in the soil. The federal government, FEMA, hasn't been willing to pay to get the ground tested after they took out 6 inches. The insurance companies are also not willing to pay for it, so a lot of homeowners are trying to figure out how they're going to find the money to do the testing. Is it safe for them to move back in? We've got to figure that out. And then we have to address a lot of insurance issues as well, because a lot of folks are getting denied by insurance companies, or they're forced to itemize down to $250 any object, provide photographic evidence. That's simply not possible for a great many people, and they're not getting the kind of support they should and have paid for with their insurance premiums.
And Senator Padilla, so how much of this is just a reluctance out of the White House?
Yeah, well, reluctance maybe would be the best case scenario. My concern is that maybe they're playing political games, because Donald Trump has not been shy since the beginning of his administration to try to leverage disaster aid for unrelated issues, whether it's how we manage our water, whether it's voter ID or anything else. On the congressional side, I'm proud to say we have kept the California delegation united on a bipartisan basis, asking for the resources that California, particularly Southern California, needs. Just as we've been there for other regions of the country in their moment of need, in their moment of crisis, we expect the same from our nation and from the federal government. So if you were to ask me my focus, I say it's twofold. One, we know there's a lot of individual families that are still struggling. It's been a year. And it's the minority that have been able to rebuild and move back into communities. A lot of families dealing with insurance companies or what have you. We need to make sure that we support them until we rebuild homes and entire communities. The bigger picture here is this disaster aid request that the state of California has made. That is so key to rebuilding the general public infrastructure need. It's hard to move back into a home, rebuild your home, if the streets aren't there, if the gas lines aren't there, the water infrastructure and the power infrastructure hasn't been rebuilt. And so a lot of that is kind of going slower than it should be because of the delay by the White House.
There have been plenty of disasters in the past. How different is this response from what you've seen when you were a member of the House?
This is very different. As Alex was saying, whenever there's been a disaster around the country, California stepped forward, California's representatives have. I remember going to Louisiana right after Katrina and, of course, fully advocating for support. It never would have occurred to me to say or think, well, that's a red state, so maybe we slow the help down or we don't provide help at all. It is never.
And that's what's happening here.
That's what's happening here. And of course, it's part of a broader whole. You're seeing energy projects killed in blue states. You're seeing even support, supplemental food nutrition assistance support for hungry families being doled out or not doled out on a basis of did that state support the president. I've never seen a situation where the president didn't feel they were president for the whole country, only those parts of the country that voted for him. That's the concern. We're a donor state. We send far more money back to Washington than we get back in return. We have contributed more to the recovery of other states from their disasters than any other state of the union. And we're just demanding that we get the same treatment in return.
Yeah,
Right.
I think it's both the political times that we're living in, unfortunately, right? Disaster aid has never been politicized. It hasn't been a partisan issue in the past. And there's some Republicans that are working to keep it that way, but the one in the White House is a challenge. There's also the scale of the disaster, right? This was not just any other fire or wildfire. When I tell my colleagues from other parts of the country, we're talking 3 times the size of Manhattan is the footprint of Southern California that was impacted by the fires. It's a lot. That's why it's the tens and tens of thousands of homes and businesses, entire communities that were burned. The scale is different than other disasters as well.
So, Senator Padilla, this is a transactional president. Some people might be upset with this, but I don't think I've ever heard him say, he may have said it, but I don't think President Trump has ever said, we need to do this because it's the right thing. What do you have to offer him that would get this kind of aid, and will it take a majority in the Senate? I mean, is that the only leverage you would have is if Democrats controlled the Senate?
Yeah. It shouldn't have to be that way.
I know you can lament
shouldn't have to play into a transactional president. This is simply the right thing to do. I do think we have more than enough colleagues on the other side of the aisle, both in the Senate and in the House, that would vote according to award the much-needed disaster aid. Because guess what? It's not just the Los Angeles region that is waiting for it. There's been disasters in Texas. There's been disasters in North Carolina. There's been disasters in other parts of the country, and they too are waiting. But Los Angeles is more in the spotlight again because of the scale of the disaster. And I think part of what's making the rebuilding tougher is, to your point, not just building materials and everything else is getting more expensive. Housing in general was expensive before the fires and before the Trump administration. So it's made the cost and the challenge of rebuilding that much more difficult, which means we're that much more committed to helping families all the way through.
Senator Schiff, has anybody from the administration talked to you? What kind of communication do you have with the administration over the recovery?
Mostly, frankly, it's been working through our colleagues, Republican colleagues, as Alex says, at a member level. Throughout the course of the year, particularly after the fires, I would have Republican members say, don't worry, we're going to be there for you. We're going to make sure your constituents get what they need. And indeed, we've sent bipartisan letters to the White House requesting an appropriation. So there is bipartisan support in Congress. What we have not yet seen, apart from the president making a request, is a willingness to initiate the process in the Congress even without the president's request, because we can do that. Nothing prevents us from doing that. And if California aid is tied to aid for other states and other disasters, it stands all the greater chance of both passage and getting signed by the president. One way or another, and I don't really care which, we have to get that aid moving. And I agree with Alex. It shouldn't be, what do we need to do to placate the president? How do we give in to him on some other unrelated policies so that he will provide disaster relief? He seems to forget there are millions of Californians, among other things, who voted for him. And he's punishing them along with everybody else. But as you say, this is not a president, and I've never seen him say this too, but maybe he has, who was asked the question, what's the right thing to do? That's what I'm going to do.
I also think there's an important distinction between the rank and file professionals at some of these federal agencies that are sort of here on the ground or more regional that have been responsive and assisting. It can always be better, different than the political appointees at headquarters back in Washington, D.C. I think that's important to distinguish. The other thing is, as we hear from people that are struggling to rebuild, aside from their individual challenges, the question of how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? And so spending time with our colleagues, both sides of the aisle, to think, how do we improve how we anticipate the potential for wildfires? Just as we've gotten good at anticipating hurricanes and tornadoes, Southern California is all too familiar with what red flag warnings are, but the rest of the country isn't. It's a relatively new phenomenon. Pre-positioning of assets when there's a potential for a big fire. How we combat fires when they do happen, working federal, state, and local together. We have now in the state of California the largest air firefighting fleet in the world because of the investments that have been made in partnership? How do we utilize newer technologies for monitoring and modeling of fires to inform a more strategic and effective response? A lot of this work is now in legislation that's being advanced on a bipartisan basis.
So what do you want the public to do?
Well, the public has been wonderful, and through tragedies like this, you see communities coming together and pitching in for each other. We have been gathering a lot of information from constituents about the challenges they're facing, and that helps us legislatively. It also helps us, where it's necessary, put pressure on insurance companies when they're stonewalling, when they're lowballing, when they're demanding itemization, which is simply not feasible. We can weigh in. We can't necessarily tell the insurance companies what to do, but they know at the end of the day, if they don't perform, there's legislation they may not like coming down the pike. So the feedback from constituents really important. And, having people weigh in with the president, express themselves publicly is really important to let the White House know that, hey, there are a lot of people hurting here who deserve help, who need help, and let's not make disaster assistance yet another partisan issue. That's just not good for the country. And indeed, I remind my colleagues of this back in the Congress, which is, do we really want to go down this road where do you want a Democratic president not to help your state after a disaster because, well, the Republican president didn't help California? We don't want to see that. I don't want to see that.
Right. More people voted for Donald Trump in L.A. County than in something like 4 battleground states.
Right.
So to your point, there are a lot of Republicans who are being punished by this. Senator Padilla, I'll have you wrap this up. There's concerns about the role of the federal government if the government shuts down. We're looking at a possible shutdown again at the end of the month. What is the possibility there? And what are the concerns about the economy going forward? Because you had certainly the tariffs have had an impact on the rebuilding process. The declining labor force, certainly with the immigration rates, something 40% of all the construction workers were undocumented. Speak to that.
Yeah, well, it's the more recent signs of the negotiation for the spending bills that are due by the end of January seem to be encouraging. So let's hope we avoid a government shutdown and fund the government at levels that meet the needs of what we're trying to provide in all areas, not just defense, right? That's the president's number one priority, but with FEMA and HUD and education and health, all the other areas, particularly when it comes to this recovery, community development block grants, on and on and on. Concerns about the economy, I mean, they've been there and they've been exacerbated, unfortunately. The tariffs, unnecessary tariff wars have raised prices on Americans, including in Californians. You talked about workforce. 40% of the construction workforce in California are immigrants. Mostly, legal, documented, but yes, some undocumented as well. When you remove, upwards of 40% of the workforce, either through deportation or through fear, guess what? The cost of labor goes up, which means the cost of rebuilding goes up. It's unnecessary. There's got to be a better way.
Senator Alex Padilla, Senator Adam Schiff, thank you very much.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Good luck.